The wind howled through the broken pines as 12-year-old. Eli Turner awoke to a silence so deep it seemed to swallow the world. His head throbbed. The last thing he remembered was his father's voice shouting, then the crash now. The camp wagon lay on its side, one wheel still spinning weakly in the mud. A pot of beans had spilled across the dirt, steam rising in the morning chill. And there was no sign of anyone, Dad? Eli's voice cracked as it left his throat. He tried again, louder this time. Mom. Only the forest answered, branches creaking, crows calling, a river murmuring somewhere beyond the trees. He pushed himself upright, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. The small clearing that had been their campsite was half destroyed, bedrolls scattered, supplies torn open, the ground scarred by the heavy rain that had turned the night into chaos for hours. Eli searched the woods, calling their names until his throat was raw. But the deeper he went, the heavier the silence became. The forest felt endless, each tree a shadow that hid either salvation or despair. He found no footprints, no voices, only the whisper of the wind. When the sun began to set, he returned to the overturned wagon and sat beside it. Shivering he was alone that night, the wilderness revealed its true face. The temperature dropped sharply, and the stars hung low and cold. Eli curled inside what was left of a canvas tarp, clutching his father's pocket knife, his only comfort, his only weapon. He thought of home, the smell of his mother's cornbread, the sound of his father's laughter by the fire. He tried to hold on to those memories as wolves howled somewhere in the distance. He didn't sleep much by morning. Hunger gnawed at him. The food stores had been spoiled by the rain, and his small canteen was half empty. He scavenged what he could, a handful of crushed oats, some soggy crackers, and ate them slowly. Forcing himself to chew, when he looked around at the wreckage of the camp, the reality began to sink in. There were no roads, no other camps, no sign of rescue. The wilderness stretched in every direction, an ocean of trees and fog. Still, Eli refused to give up. He remembered the lessons his father had taught him on hunting trips. Always find water first. Follow the river. Build shelter before dark. Clinging to those words like a prayer, he gathered what he could carry: a blanket, the knife, a small piece of flint, and set off toward the sound of rushing water. The forest was thick and ancient, filled with gnarled trunks and moss-covered stones. He tripped often, scratched his hands on thorns, and stumbled through the underbrush until he reached a stream. He knelt beside it, drinking greedily, feeling the icy water sting his cracked lips. Then he began to explore along its edge, searching for anything: tracks, signs of a road, or even a cabin. Hours passed, and exhaustion set in. His body was weak, his hope weaker, as the sun lowered again. He built a crude shelter from branches and leaves, copying what he had once seen in a book about explorers. It wasn't much, but it blocked the wind. He huddled beneath it, listening to the symphony of the wild owls hooting, insects buzzing. The steady pulse of the stream. Tears came silently that night, hidden behind his dirty hands. He wasn't just lost in the forest. He was lost inside himself, adrift between the boy he had been and the survivor he would have to become. Somewhere deep in his chest, fear and determination began to wrestle when dawn came again. Eli rose from the shelter with a new thought. No one was coming to save him if he wanted to live. He would have to learn how to fight the wilderness on its own terms, alone, afraid, but no longer hopeless. He took his first true step into the unknown. Eli Turner awoke to the faint light of dawn filtering through the trees, the kind that made everything shimmer in pale silver. His body ached from sleeping on the cold ground, his throat dry, and his stomach burning with hunger. The forest was quiet, now too quiet. He could hear his heartbeat, slow and uncertain, echoing in the stillness. The boy who once complained about chores and cold mornings was gone. What remained was someone new, though he didn't know it yet. someone learning the first, harsh lesson of the wilderness. Only the strong and the clever survive. He began the day by following the stream deeper into the woods. The air smelled of pine, and wet earth birds darted through the branches, and every rustle made him flinch. He tried to remember what his father had taught him. Animals come to water. Stay alert. His eyes scanned the banks for movement. Once he saw a deer drinking, elegant and calm. He took a step closer, but the creature raised its head, looked straight at him, and bolted into the trees. He stood there, empty-handed. Realizing how clumsy he was by midday, hunger drove him to desperation. He remembered the berries he'd seen near the trail and began picking them eagerly. Small, purple, and sweet-looking. He ate a handful before his stomach began to cramp. Panic surged. His father's voice came back like thunder. "Never eat what you don't know." Eli fell to his knees, clutching his stomach, thinking he might die right there under the open sky. The pain passed after a while, leaving him trembling and wiser. That was lesson 2. The wild doesn't forgive ignorance. He spent the next hours watching instead of acting. He crouched in silence as a fox trotted past, sleek and purposeful. It paused to listen, then pounced. Dragging a mouse from the leaves, Eli studied its movements, the stillness before the strike, the patience. He realized that animals knew things he didn't: how to move without being seen, how to take only what they needed. So he decided to imitate them. That night, he built a better shelter, using fallen branches woven together and layered with moss. It wasn't perfect, but it held. He found flat stones near the river and tried striking his father's flint against them. Sparks flew, a tiny miracle, and after many tries, a small flame flickered to life. The warmth filled him with something deeper than heat. It was the first spark of control in a world that had taken everything from him. He cooked nothing, but he sat by that fire like a king beside his throne, whispering to the flames as if they could hear him. The days blurred together after that long stretches of wandering, scavenging, and learning. He fashioned a crude spear from a branch and tried fishing in the shallows. He failed again and again. Once, he slipped on the rocks and plunged into the icy water, gasping as it stole his breath. When he crawled out, shivering and soaked, he realized another truth of the wilderness: it doesn't care whether you live or die. He wrapped himself in his blanket and cried quietly. But when the tears stopped, something inside him hardened. He was learning. Painfully and slowly as dusk fell, the forest came alive with sounds: the distant hoot of an owl, the crackle of branches as unseen animals moved through the dark. Eli sat beside his small fire, clutching his knife. Every muscle tense. Fear was still there, but it no longer ruled him. It had become a companion, a constant reminder that he was alive. That night, under a blanket of stars, Eli whispered a promise into the flames. "I'll make it. I'll learn your ways." It wasn't a prayer, it was a declaration. The boy who had once depended on others was beginning to depend on himself. The wilderness had tested him, punished him, and nearly killed him, but in its merciless silence, it had also begun to shape him. He didn't know it yet, but with every mistake, every scar, and every small victory, the forest was teaching him its ancient law: respect the wild or be swallowed by it. Snow had begun to fall the morning Eli found the wolf. It came softly at first, then white flakes drifting through the trees, settling on his hair and lashes. The forest was quieter than usual. Muffled beneath the growing blanket of winter, Eli's breath came out in frosty clouds as he trudged along the riverbank, clutching his spear and scanning for movement. His traps had been empty for 3 days, and hunger gnawed at him more fiercely than ever. He was beginning to think he would starve when he heard it, a faint whimper carried by the wind. At first, he thought it was his imagination, another trick of the lonely wilderness. But then it came again, sharp and weak, like a cry for help. Eli followed the sound through a tangle of brush until he found it, a small wolf pup, shivering beside the body of its dead mother. The she-wolf's fur was matted with blood, her body stiff and still. A broken trap lay nearby, its jagged teeth gleaming cruelly in the snow. The pup snarled when Eli approached, baring its tiny fangs, though its legs trembled with fear. He could have left it, should have, perhaps, but something inside him wouldn't let him walk away. The sight of the helpless creature mirrored his own loneliness too closely. He knew what it was to lose everything, to be stranded in a world that didn't care if you lived or died. Eli crouched a few feet away, speaking softly, "Hey, easy now, I'm not going to hurt you." His voice was hoarse, the words clouding in the cold air. He tore a strip from his blanket and placed it near the pup, then slid a few crumbs of dried meat beside it. The pup growled again, but didn't run. Hunger won out over fear. It crawled forward, snatched the food, and backed away. Eli stayed with it for hours. Keeping his distance, he built a small fire, letting its warmth spread through the clearing. By nightfall, the pup had stopped growling. It was too weak to fight, its sides heaving with exhaustion when the last light faded from the sky. Eli gently wrapped the tiny creature in his blanket and carried it back to his shelter. It was the first living soul he had touched in weeks. Over the next few days, the boy and the wolf began their uneasy truce. Eli fed it scraps and spoke to it often, giving it a name, Ash, for the color of its fur and the ashes of the fire that had kept them both alive at first. Ash refused to come near him unless there was food. But slowly, trust began to bloom between them. The pup started following him to the river, watching curiously as he fished or gathered wood when he slept. He could feel its small body curl beside his feet, its steady breathing a strange comfort against the cold. Together, they learned to survive. Eli hunted. Ash learned to track. The boy discovered that the wolf's senses were sharper than his own. Ash could smell rabbits before Eli even saw their tracks, or sense danger long before it appeared. The pup grew stronger, faster, more confident. And in the quiet moments when the forest felt too vast and empty, Eli would talk to him about his parents, his fears, his dreams of home. Ash never answered, but his steady gaze seemed to understand. One night, a storm swept through the valley, roaring like an angry beast. The wind tore at their shelter, and snow blew through the cracks. Eli huddled close to the fire, clutching Ash tightly. For the first time, he didn't feel completely alone. As thunder echoed across the mountains, he realized the wilderness had given him something unexpected, a friend in saving the wolf. Eli had saved a part of himself, the part that still believed in loyalty, in trust, in family. He didn't know it yet. But the bond between boy and beast would become the heartbeat of his survival. The wilderness had taken much from him, but in its cold heart it had offered something precious in return. Companionship born not of comfort, but of shared struggle. And under the silver glow of the storm, Eli whispered to his only friend, "We'll make it. Ash, you and me, by the time the snow began to melt." Eli Turner was no longer the frightened child who had stumbled through the forest begging for rescue. The wilderness had shaped him, carved strength into his hands and silence into his heart. Beside him trotted Ash, now nearly grown sleek, quick, and loyal. Together, they had survived the bitter winter, and now, as spring crept across the land, they began to build something neither had known in months, a home. The forest was waking up. Streams gushed with melted ice, the trees whispered with new leaves, and animals returned to the valleys. Eli followed the sun one morning to a rocky hill overlooking a small lake. The view stole his breath-wide open sky, endless trees and the shimmering reflection of water. For the first time, he thought of staying, not just surviving day to day. This could be it, he murmured. Ash wagged his tail as if agreeing. Eli began collecting fallen branches, stones, and bark. It took him days to build the foundation, a ring of stones at the base of a small hollow beneath an overhanging cliff. The cliff provided shelter from the rain, and the nearby trees offered firewood and camouflage. He worked tirelessly, sunup to sundown, his hands blistered and raw. When he finally stood back to look at the rough walls and roof of his shelter, a strange pride filled him. It wasn't much, just branches tied with vines and a roof sealed with mud and moss, but it was his. Made with his own strength and stubborn will. He lined the inside with dry grass and pine needles for warmth, hung his father's knife by the entrance, and built a proper fire pit with flat stones. Each improvement made the place feel more alive. At night, the flicker of the fire cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the soft rhythm of Ash's breathing lulled him to sleep for the first time since the accident. Eli didn't feel like he was running from the wilderness. He was part of it. Days turned into weeks. Eli became a creature of routine, waking at dawn, fishing at the lake, gathering berries and herbs, and checking his traps. He learned the forest's moods, the calm hum before rain, the patterns of birds when predators were near, the way fog settled in the valley at dawn. His body grew stronger, leaner, his skin turned bronze under the sun. He spoke less, listened more. Nature had become his teacher, and Ash, his constant companion. One afternoon, as he sat by the lake mending his blanket, he realized how much he had changed. The boy who had once cried for his parents was now calm, almost peaceful. He still missed them, he always would, but he had learned something deeper. That grief could coexist with gratitude. The wilderness had taken away his family, yet it had also given him purpose, courage, and the bond of friendship. Eli began to mark his days by carving small notches into a tree near his shelter. Each line was a promise to keep living, to keep learning. Over time, the bark filled with hundreds of marks, a silent record of survival as spring deepened. His small home flourished. Wildflowers bloomed around the clearing. Birds nested in nearby branches. Sometimes, deer wandered close enough for Ash to watch them without growling. It was peaceful, almost sacred. The forest no longer felt like an enemy. It had become a companion. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, painting the sky in gold and crimson, Eli sat outside his shelter. His hand resting on Ash's fur, the fire crackled softly, and the air smelled of pine and smoke. He gazed at the horizon and whispered, "We did it, Ash. We made our home." Ash looked up, ears twitching, as if understanding that night. Eli dreamed not of escape, but of roots, of the strength it takes to stand firm in the face of storms. He had built more than a shelter. He had built belonging. The wilderness was no longer something to survive. It was now the only world where he truly felt alive. Winter returned without mercy. The air grew sharp again, and the world around Eli turned white and silent. He had survived one winter before, but this one felt different, colder, heavier, lonelier. His small home of branches and stone was strong now, sealed against wind and snow, and stocked with food from months of careful preparation. Still, the long nights stretched endlessly, broken only by the crackle of fire and the soft breathing of Ash, the wolf who had become his shadow. Then, one gray morning, the stillness was broken. Eli was checking his snares along the frozen stream when he saw something strange. A dark shape sprawled in the snow. At first, he thought it was an animal, maybe a fallen deer. But as he crept closer, his heart jolted. It was a man. The stranger lay half buried beneath a drift, his face pale as ice, his clothes torn and stiff with frost. For a moment, Eli hesitated. He hadn't seen another human being in over a year. Fear and curiosity battled inside him. What if this man was dangerous? What if he died right here in front of him? Ash growled softly, hackles raised. Circling the figure, Eli knelt beside the stranger and pressed 2 fingers to his neck, a faint pulse weak. "But there, he's alive," Eli whispered. The decision came before he could think. He lifted the man under the arms. Dragging him slowly through the snow toward his shelter, it took all his strength. By the time they arrived, his arms trembled and his lungs burned inside. Eli stoked the fire high, wrapped the man in furs, and poured melted snow between his cracked lips. Hours passed, the stranger's breathing steadied, color slowly returning to his face when his eyes finally opened. They were gray-blue, clouded with confusion. Where am I? The man rasped. Eli froze. The sound of another human voice felt unreal. You're safe, he said softly. I found you by the river. The man coughed weakly. How long was I out? Almost a day, he nodded, his gaze wandering around the small shelter, the stone fire pit, the tools, the wolf lying in the corner. You live here. Alone? Eli hesitated, glancing at Ash. Not alone. The man gave a faint smile. Name's Jonas Hall, trapper. I was heading north before the storm hit. His voice carried both weariness and wonder. Didn't think I'd wake up again. Over the following days, Jonas grew stronger. He shared bits of his story, a wandering trapper who had lost his horse and supplies to a blizzard. Eli, in turn, told him how he had come to live here, how he'd learned to survive. Jonas listened with quiet awe. You've done what most grown men couldn't, he said one night by the fire. You've made peace with the wild. Their companionship grew naturally, though not without tension. Jonas was rough-edged and restless. Used to the company of men and the noise of taverns, Eli had become quiet, instinctive, more part of the forest than of civilization. Still, they learned from each other. Jonas showed Eli how to set better traps, skin animals cleanly, and read the stars. Eli taught him how to listen to the forest, how to hear the signs of weather and danger before they came. But as winter deepened, so did an unspoken conflict. Jonas began to talk more about leaving, about heading south once the thaw came, finding a settlement, returning to people. You should come with me, he told Eli one evening. You've done your time out here. You're still a boy. You belong with folks, not ghosts and wolves. Eli stared into the fire, feeling a hollow ache twist in his chest. He had dreamed of rescue once, but now the thought of leaving his home, the lake, the trees, Ash felt like tearing something vital from his heart. This is where I belong, he said quietly. Jonas sighed, watching the snow swirl outside. No one belongs to the wilderness forever. Son, neither spoke after that. The fire crackled between them, warm but dividing outside. The storm howled like a beast, and inside, Eli felt the first flicker of fear, not of dying, but of losing the fragile family he had found. He didn't know it yet, but before winter ended, the wilderness would force both men and the wolf to face that fear head-on. When the thaw finally came, it came fast, rivers roaring, snow breaking apart in torrents, and the forest waking like a beast from hibernation. The frozen world that had kept Eli and Jonas safe through the winter now turned dangerous again. Streams flooded their valley. Trees cracked under the strain of melting ice, and the air carried the restless scent of spring storms. Eli stood outside his shelter, watching water rush through what used to be their trail. Ash circled uneasily, his ears twitching. Behind them, Jonas packed his few belongings into a weathered satchel. It's time, Jonas said quietly. Eli turned, his jaw tight. He knew what Jonas meant. The older man was ready to leave, to follow the river south, to find people and warmth and the world beyond the trees. But for Eli, that world had become something distant, almost foreign. You could stay, he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Jonas looked at him with something like sadness. You've built a life here, Eli, but it's not a life that'll last forever. Winter will come again, and next time you might not survive it. You need people. You need more than this. Eli wanted to argue, but the words caught in his throat. He glanced at Ash, who stood beside him, tail low, eyes alert. I already have more than I ever thought I would, he murmured that night. The storm came without warning. Thunder cracked across the valley, shaking the ground. The river that had once fed them now raged, swelling higher with each hour of rain. When Eli stepped outside, lightning illuminated a sight that froze him. The river had burst its banks, and a wall of water was charging toward their camp. Jonas, he shouted. The two men scrambled to gather what they could, but it was too late. The water crashed through the trees, tearing down branches and carrying debris in its wake. Shelter shuddered under the force. "We've got to get to higher ground," Jonas yelled. Ash barked sharply, already racing uphill. Eli followed, the rain blinding him. He could barely hear Jonas over the roar of the flood. Then a tree gave way behind them. Eli turned just in time to see Jonas stumble as a branch struck his shoulder. Without thinking, Eli lunged forward, grabbing his arm and dragging him toward the ridge. The climb was brutal, mud sliding beneath their feet, rain pounding down, the sound of destruction below. When they finally reached the rocky slope above the valley, both collapsed, gasping for breath. The shelter was gone, the lake, their hunting grounds all swallowed by brown, churning water. Jonas groaned, clutching his shoulder. "Guess the wild's not done teaching me lessons," he muttered through a grimace. Eli laughed weakly, though his chest ached. "It never is." They stayed there until the storm passed, soaked but alive. When dawn came, the valley lay silent, again ruined, but glimmering in the pale light. Everything Eli had built was gone. But as he looked at Jonas beside him and Ash resting against his leg, he realized something that made his throat tighten. He hadn't lost his home. His home was right here. Breathing beside him, Jonas met his gaze. "You saved my life, boy." Eli shook his head. "You saved mine too, just in a different way." The days that followed were slow and quiet. They rebuilt what little they could on higher ground. But the air carried change. Jonas spoke less of leaving. He began to teach Eli how to trap more efficiently, how to navigate by the stars, and even how to craft stronger tools. Eli, in turn, taught him patience, the kind that came from listening to the forest rather than fighting it. As spring spread across the valley, they stood together at the edge of the lake, now calmer and clearer. Ash splashed through the shallows, chasing fish. Eli smiled faintly. "Maybe this is enough," he said. Jonas nodded. "Sometimes family finds you where you least expect it." Eli turned toward the trees, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. The wilderness had taken everything from him once, but now it had given him something greater, a father figure, a loyal friend, and a sense of belonging no town could ever offer. He had entered the wild as a frightened boy. He had emerged as something more, a part of it. As the wind swept through the valley, Eli whispered, "Thank you." He wasn't sure if he was speaking to his lost family, the forest, or the life he had built, maybe all of them, because at last, Eli Turner understood. The wilderness hadn't been his enemy. It had been his home all along, and the place where he had found the family he chose.